Oh, you want another spooky story? Well, I've got the perfect one just for you. This is the Wailing Woman. She hadn't slept in several days. The last 2 days she'd woken in the forest not far from her house, adorned in a long billowy dress and cloak, her hair a mat of leaves and dirt, her feet bare and sore as though she had walked far. She always woke near the same tree, its thick roots forced deep within the ground, spreading across as though it touched almost every tree in the forest. She'd always avoided walking through this forest after she fell as a kid. She'd been playing with a friend in the clearing nearby and had run into the forest to hide, but had tripped over several roots as she ran by. Her small body had hit the forest floor with such force the trees seemed to tremble. Her friend had sworn he'd seen an old lady with long dark hair looming over her body before she got up. She was sure he was just trying to scare her, but they'd never return to the forest. In the early hours of the morning, she'd find herself having to navigate her way through the forest and back out towards the old clearing, and walk the short trail home. It wasn't until today, the third day it happened, that she realized she knew the way. Her feet predicted every root, every rock, her hands reaching out for trees before she knew they were even there. She was finding the trail within a few minutes. The trail was another 5 minutes back to her house. It was the only moment she ever felt glad that she now lived alone, where she had no one to explain to why she was always walking back into the house at some uncommonly early hour of the morning. No one to be concerned. After the second morning of waking up somewhere outside her home, she'd installed security cameras at the main entrances. Feeling physically exhausted but alive with energy, she collected her laptop as she made her way through the door and into the kitchen to where she'd left it the night before. She'd hoped the cameras would give her some answers, at least to whether she left her home in her pajamas or in the cloak. She was most curious where the cloak came from. It was nothing like the one she'd made for an old Halloween costume. But she'd forgotten to set the cameras to record. Standing in their kitchen, damp from the forest floor and shrouded in an unknown cloak, she began to cry. Tears leaked from her eyes as she stared at her computer that couldn't answer her questions. Her hands began to shake, and she slammed an open palm on the counter. Something was wrong, and she needed to know what. The shower was warm against her skin, soothing the aches and creaks within. Once dressed, she called her doctor and booked an appointment, determined to get an answer. A previous Google search said that stress can lead to sleepwalking. Grief often altered one's mind, causing them to act other than normal. She wondered if it could still be that. But she'd seen Dr. Fairfield a month ago, who had given her the all clear, said she was doing really well and wouldn't need any more appointments. She felt normal. Well, whatever this version of normal was. Until that night a week ago. She'd gone out with some friends, decided they'd needed a few drinks and to let off steam. They'd gone to the local pub and had spent the whole night there until they were kicked out at closing time. One of her close friends said they should walk back to his. He only lived a few blocks away, and if you took a few of the old alleyways, it was no time at all. They'd all had enough to drink that no one thought better than to walk through a dark alley at night. Another friend mumbled something about ghost stories and how they were all bullshit. There'd been a collective grumble in agreement. She couldn't bring herself to agree, though. Something gnawed inside her, and she felt his presence lingering somewhere behind her. Always there. Forever and always. Dr. Fairfield had said it was normal to feel like that after a while she wouldn't notice it anymore. She'd adjust to life without him, that he wasn't there looking over her shoulder. He was gone. so she'd glanced behind her and told herself no one was there. They'd been a minute from her friend's place when the streetlights had begun to flicker. The air felt colder and a shiver crept across their skin one by one. Someone made a joke that this was the moment they were all murdered. Another punched him and said he wasn't funny. But she felt it, an overwhelming nausea curling up within her, something scratching away at her bones, pulling at her lungs, climbing its way up her throat. Everything had started to go dark and she felt faint. The last thing she saw before she hit the pavement was a dark, cloaked figure. When she came to, her friend said she'd screamed, that she had crumpled to the ground after letting out a scream that shattered the streetlight. Dr. Fairfield said it was probably a panic attack. Her friends had scared her into panicking about something that wasn't real. She was getting in her own head again. He reminded her that he couldn't haunt her if she chose not to let him. She'd convinced herself the doctor was right, but asked for a refill on her sleeping tablets. She'd seen his face less and less as she went to sleep, but after that night, it felt like he was lying right next to her. She started taking more than the recommended dose. She saw Dr. Fairfield again after a week of waking up in the forest. Told him what had been happening. He told her she'd regressed, that she'd need to see him twice a week again, and that she'd have to stop taking the sleeping tablets. Told her that this was starting to become a real problem, that she may need more help than he could give. She was a danger to herself. As he scribbled away on his notepad, she felt an electricity ripple through her body. Her chest felt warm, as though her heart were beating too fast and she would surely faint. The air felt thin and she gripped onto the edges of the chair, her nails pulling threads, breaking seams. A shadow of Dr. Fairfield sloped against the wall. It looked haggard and ghostly. Dr. Fairfield dropped his pen. It fell from his hand as his face turned an awful shade of blue. A blue not unlike the sky when it first became morning. His wide eyes found hers as her mouth opened. Her throat pulsed as she let out another scream. The scream appeared to reverberate through his body, carrying it from his chair to the floor as the life escaped him. A receptionist and security guard came through the door and were shouting for an ambulance. The doctor had died, right before her eyes. It was her scream. She was sure it was her scream that killed him. Her panicked eyes found the clock as it ticked on the wall above the daily inspirational quote, to the cufflinks clinking as they rolled his body over, to the door handle as it tapped against the wall every time a new person forced their way in. She removed herself from the room, not wanting to be in the way of the many uniformed bodies. The police and paramedics had arrived. The words heart attack filled the air around them. The police ushered sneezing, spluttering people out into the car park. His body came out on a stretcher, followed by a line of paramedics, police, receptionist, security guard. No one asked her what happened. No one looked her way. Cars drove by until she was alone in the car park. The automatic sliding doors of the entrance locked shut before her, reflecting the afternoon light. Reflecting not her body, but a body not unlike hers. A woman with wild hair, a silver dress billowing in a non-existent breeze, and a cloak. A dark cloak with the hood over her head. She walked up towards the glass, leaned in close as the woman in the reflection breathed on the doors. A long finger pressed against the glass, spelling out a word. Banshee. The woman in the reflection looked through her, and she opened her mouth and screamed.